Have you ever stuck your hand out of the window of a car and felt like it was flying? You can tilt it down and up and feel your hand trying to go in that direction with the wind. This same process, although a little bit more complicated, is also how planes fly. This is able to happen because of the four forces of flight. We have lift, weight, drag, and thrust. Now let's break those down a little more. The first force is lift. Lift is what actually keeps the plane in the air instead of just going super fast on the runway. But before we can understand lift, we need to understand a little bit more about air itself. Contrary to what you might think, air is actually a fluid. This basically means that air flows and takes new shapes based on its environment. For the sake of our understanding, I'm going to draw the airflow as these horizontal lines. Now that we understand a little bit more about air itself, let's go back to lift. When you're in an airplane, the wings tilt up slightly and the airflow catches underneath these wings. It's important to remember that lift can only happen when there is a difference in velocity, but we'll talk more about that when we discuss thrust. Because of Newton's third law, which states that every action is an equal and opposite reaction, when the wings of an airplane disrupt the airflow and push it downwards, there is lift generated in the opposite direction, pushing the plane upwards. This process of lift is what keeps the airplane actually in the air. It's also what makes your hand push upwards and downwards when you tilt it out of the car window, just like the wings of an airplane. Next, let's talk about weight. Weight acts as an opposite force to lift. Just like everything else on Earth, airplanes have mass, and because they have mass, gravity acts on them. This means that gravity is pulling the airplane downwards towards the Earth's center. For an airplane to fly, the force of lift generated must be greater than the force of weight, at least until the airplane is actually in the air. Once you're in an airplane and climb to whatever altitude you want, the plane is tilted so that the forces of lift and weight are balanced. Once this happens, these forces cancel out and the airplane is able to stay suspended and fly at a level height. Next, let's discuss thrust. Thrust is similar to lift in the sense that both work to keep a plane in the air, rather than pulling it towards the ground. Thrust is what propels the airplane forward. In the case of your hand out the window, thrust happens because your car is driving fast and pushing your hand through the air. For an airplane, thrust occurs because of the engine or propeller. Once again, because of Newton's third law of motion, air is pushed into the engine and pushed outwards, propelling the plane forward and making the wind pass by fast enough for lift to be generated under the wings. This is the difference in velocity that an airplane needs. Obviously, we can't just wait for super strong winds to happen all the time, so we need to generate that difference in speed ourselves for a plane to take off and fly. Finally, let's discuss drag. Just like how lift and weight act in opposite directions, drag is the opposite of thrust. Drag is what causes an airplane to slow down, usually because of friction or air resistance. To test this, let's go back to our hand out the window example. Say instead of keeping your hand straight, you flattened it against the wind. If you do this, you're going to have to fight a lot harder to keep your hand from being pulled backwards because you're trying to overcome the force of drag. This is why airplanes and race cars are made to be super sleek, so they can cut through the air and have less drag to slow them down. When something is designed to have little drag, it's called aerodynamic. When all four of these forces work together, it allows an airplane to fly. When lift and thrust are greater than weight and drag, the plane flies upwards. When lift and thrust are less than weight and drag, the plane flies downwards. When all of these forces balance each other out, the airplane, or your hand, is able to fly in an even direction.